Reading 131 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicole. Volume 3. Great Animal House, July 23, 1948. Essence and Personality. Work Idea. The work teaches that there are two neutralizing forces, or third forces. One is life as seen. This third force, this neutralizing force of life, keeps personality active and essence passive. The other force is the work, esoteric teaching, which comes from a source that is not life as seen. Only this third force can bring about the miracle of making personality passive and essence active. Commentary. You will understand by now that as long as the personality formed in us by our contact with manifest life is active, then the inborn, real part of us, called essence, cannot grow. A man, a woman, living only by the acquired side in themselves, the personality, the social or business or professional side, cannot possibly have peace of mind, internal happiness, or a real center of gravity. Why? Because the acquired personality, which controls them because it is active, is not really themselves, but outside themselves, and depends on how others behave to them in life. For this reason, they must seek endless outer changes, excitements, varieties, and praise, congratulations, and so on, to keep up this fiction of themselves that they can take as themselves and that depends on outer life. Fictional personality, for instance, marries fictional personality, and nothing is real. But all is a kind of pretense concealing so much tiredness. Now, if you are for a moment conscious in essence, everything is, as Gurdjieff said, richer, more vivid, more real. But no one can get back to essence artificially. People try to do so by drugs, excitement, and so on, but this is not real. One has to pay beforehand to reach essence aright. Relatively speaking, everything belonging to essence is real, and everything belonging to personality is unreal. I say on purpose, relatively real and unreal. We understand that personality must be formed in us before essence can grow beyond the stage it reaches through its own power of growth. And essence can then only grow at the expense of personality. That is, in my case, at the expense of Dr. Nicole, or in your case, at the expense of this fine man, this superior woman called by your Christian name and surname. I would like you all to say internally your life names. Now your name, say Mrs. Evangeline Blessington Smith, is not you, nor is Mr. Sidmouth Clarendon Barrington you. In fact, they are your greatest enemies and do all they can to prevent essence from growing. And what a job it is to see this for oneself, and what a job it is to try to liberate oneself from this fiction to which one is an unhappy slave all one's life. Can you not envisage Mrs. Blessington Smith sweeping into the room now and saying, "I so much enjoyed the little paper we had last week," or Mr. Clarendon Barrington entering in a bored way and saying, "I would like to know exactly what personality is, in a few words, as I have to go to the palace at 9:30. Well, that is just what things are like, and all this is to illustrate what life, as a third or neutralizing force, means and how it will inevitably keep personality active and essence passive. As was said many times before, the first education for us on earth is to form a good, rich personality. The second education is to make it passive and to transmit everything valuable in it to essence so that essence can grow. This little boy, this little girl in you all. There are valuable things in a good personality, but they belong, so to speak, to the attitude, I can do. It is not these good things you have learned that have to be sacrificed. It is their framework, the feeling, the identification with them that has to be surrendered. As long as a man, a woman, ascribe to themselves all their excellent qualities, essence cannot grow. Consider this idea and reflect on it. One has to begin to see that in the larger scale and meaning of things, one does not really know how one thinks or moves or feels. Now, the personality which is governed by the false personality will have none of that nonsense. It says, I did it, I thought it, I conceived it, and so on. And so everyone is jealous and hates others and rushes into print and is all day offended and spends a lifetime of grievances in explaining how one was overlooked and so on. Yes, notice where you are offended and try to observe why. Now, if anything grows in the soil of essence instead of in the soil of personality, everything is quite different. Growth in the soil of essence is real. A man only quarrels owing to a sense of unrealness, his inner lostness. What is real in oneself never quarrels or argues about anything. And since personality is tinctured with what is acquired from life, and so not quite real, not your own, people quarrel. But who has what is of essence does not wish to quarrel with anyone because it is real, and so is so. The source of the so-called inferiority complex is the personality, and especially its controlling power, the false personality. If essence develops, there can be no sense of inferiority. How could there be? We are all inferior to ourselves because we are in personality and not in essence when something is not quite real. Say in what you say or pretend to be. And what can any of us say is real? The more you blow yourself out, like that toad in the fairy story, the more unreal and unhappy you will feel, and the more touchy and dramatic you will be, and so on. Why? Because it is all pretense, artificial, not real. A touchy person is necessarily a person who feels unreal. Do you agree? Well, consider this in yourself through self-observation. Notice where you are touchy. Then observe what it is you are so touchy about. Yes, this belongs to real self-observation. Now, essence cannot grow from what is unreal. What is essential, what is real, cannot be touchy. If you really understand something, you are not touchy. But I admit this is a difficult matter to unravel. People who think they know, like doctors or scientists, are very touchy. Still, you must admit that you are not touchy about, well, what? What can you say you are not touchy about? An interesting line of self-observation. I wonder if any of us are not, under certain circumstances, touchy about almost everything. I would only say that the difference between your picture of yourself and your actual capability makes you touchy, makes everyone extremely touchy. As I said, we are touchy about what we are not, but pretend we are, and this makes violence. But you must understand this work is directed unto ourselves, and that as long as violence, jealousy, hatred, and all the rest reign in us, we cannot awaken unless we become conscious of it, and we are no use in regard to the conscious circle of humanity, to which no man or woman can get either by bullets, knives, guns, or muscles, or by violent hatreds, by fanatical fury, or by any medieval device of that kind. We must remember that the work speaks of consciousness as its supreme object all the time, of becoming more conscious of oneself. That is, the kind of person one really is, apart from the dressed-up person. It speaks of the idea that we have to become far more conscious of the other person. In fact, see the other person in oneself. When you kill, you and the killed are the same. When you vilify, you and the vilified are the same. In the esoteric dance that Christ taught his disciples, the phrases are, I would be saved and I would save. I would be loosed and I would loose. I would be wounded and I would wound. I would be born and I would bear. I would eat and I would be eaten. I would hear and I would be heard. I would be thought, being holy thought. I would be washed and I would wash. The apocryphal Acts of John. Certainly a strange dance, and also certainly far deeper than we think. But at least we can see it is becoming conscious in two forces, in opposites, in yourself and in the other person. The work teaches that we must first become conscious in one force. That is, we must observe what we are and wish for. Then in two forces, and finally in three forces. Now, essence, since it comes from the stars, is at a higher level than personality, which is formed in us by life on the manifest earth. Essence, being therefore a higher thing, is a much more real thing. Yet it is undeveloped, a child that has to be taught at the expense of personality. You will say, how can the lower teach the higher? The higher by origin and scale. I will answer you and say that the personality, the lower, cannot teach essence, the higher, unless the work enters personality. Then the work, coming from outside, from what you hear and learn, will speak to essence from personality. It may have been that once essence could be taught the work directly from within, from higher centers. Nowadays, in the world of sleepers, the work must come from outside, from schools in the world, and so enter first the personality. This is why one task of esoteric humanity was to raise culture to a degree in which people could hear and understand enough to take in the work. The personality had to be built up by education, by all the arts, sciences, literature, and so on, to make it possible for mankind to grow and keep open a connection between sun and earth, or, if you use the language of the Gospels, between heaven and earth. For once man falls totally asleep, he will be no longer of any use and will be swept aside or made to destroy himself by wars. Man comes at a critical point in our array of creation, at the shock, fa, mi. And he is so complex just because he was designed to keep a connection between higher and lower, to be a nitrogen or third force between the upper and lower parts of the ray. This idea helps a person to remember himself, that is, to pass from an animal into a man.